All right, what's up, everybody? We are back again, and we are going to be talking about a little controversial claim that I heard here the other day. Somebody told me, man, aren't we lucky? We get to live in the era of freedom, not like those peasants and serfs that lived back all the way into the 18th and 19th century. We're so much freer than those people were. I thought, no, that shit's just wrong. But you can kind of see where that idea would come from, right? That these people lived under kings, they lived under emperors, and so it's easy to think, okay, they never got to vote, so they must be less free than we are today, when actually, not true. So it's not to say that monarchies are better than democracy or anything like that, because of course I don't think they are. But back in the 1700s, 1800s, just because you lived under a king didn't mean that you necessarily had your rights infringed upon all the time. For example, if you were living in France, the king lives in Paris, and you live down in the south of France on the Mediterranean, you could live your entire life never having the king affect your life at all. You may not be brought in to fight in armies. The king may not march in there and start enforcing his laws. He could claim he's signed a law over there in Paris, and you may never even know about it out where you live. So you're just it's kind of ridiculous, this idea that just because those people back then couldn't vote, that they were slaves to the government, and like the North Koreans are today or something like that. So let's talk a little bit about what happened, okay? And you had the Enlightenment before the American and French revolutions. The printing press had been around for a while, but literacy rates were pretty low. So around the Enlightenment, okay, the printing press is completely proliferated. There's people can read now, and so you have all these Enlightenment thinkers that are writing pamphlets and books that are expressing a desire for freedom, saying, hey, maybe the church is wrong about everything. Maybe the king isn't the smartest guy in the world and isn't ordained by God, and we could have some self-government. So those ideas spread faster than the rulers could clamp down on control. Because again, let's use the Mediterranean example. Just because the king doesn't want you reading a pamphlet and he declares up in Paris that this pamphlet's illegal, or he wants, printing presses shut down that are going to print these pamphlets, that's pretty tough to enforce hundreds of miles away, when the speediest form of communication at the time is a guy dropping off a letter on horseback. Okay, and the king's just expanding their reach all the way across hundreds of miles to their other territories. It just wasn't easy. Okay, so people did, more or less what they wanted to, despite what the king was saying based on where they lived in their territory. So the monarchies and the churches couldn't suppress the free thought like they would have liked to. And the result was a lot of people being exposed to these Enlightenment ideas. And then, what do you know? Some revolutions pop up, starting with the American Revolution in 1776, and then moving through to the French Revolution. So what happened then was the French Revolution takes hold in Europe. They cut King Louis XVI's head off. Marie Antoinette also killed by guillotine, and the First French Republic takes over. Now their path isn't as straightforward as the Americans, because the Americans established a republic, and it's still around today, the United States of America. But the French, swing back and forth from republic to empire a few times over the next 100 years. Famously, being headed by Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And what happens then is you start to see this clash between the old empires, kingdoms, and the Enlightenment countries. That's going to be France and the United States. And especially the European monarchies, they're all related to each other, right? So they want to take down the French Republic and then the French Empire, Napoleon, because they still see him as representing the Enlightenment and revolution. So that's what the Napoleonic Wars are over, is Napoleon being more than happy to take part in these fights, and then the coalitions, the old monarchies, trying to take down Napoleon. After this, clash really starts taking place in the 1800s with Napoleon and the Wars of the Coalitions. What happens is the empires lose. Napoleon ends up ripping down the Holy Roman Empire, which was headed up by the Emperor of Austria at the time, Emperor Francis. Essentially deposes him, rips the empire down, defeats Prussia, England, Spain, Lisbon, all for a short period of time. Napoleon would obviously and famously, lose at Waterloo and be banished off to an island out in the middle of the Mediterranean. He'd make his return, but the old monarchies couldn't defeat the Enlightenment. Even after Napoleon is replaced by the Bourbon king again, the king's eventually deposed and France returns to a republic. And the Enlightenment ideas have completely taken hold. Getting rid of Napoleon doesn't change any of that. So then we make our way quickly through the 1800s, where Europe is really grappling with the new empires that are falling. Remember, World War I hits in early 1900, and that these crumbling empires, that's really where they get taken off the board, most of them. The French and British stick around. Their empires will fall after World War II, but the Ottoman Empire is destroyed, the Russian Empire is destroyed, the Austro-Hungarian Empire is destroyed. The German and Japanese empires are just starting to be built up, but they will all be destroyed after the Second World War. And then what happens after the Second World War is we get the bipolar world, where the western half of the world is run by the democracies and the eastern half is communist regimes. So even now, after 1991 and the collapse of the communists, the rise of quasi-republics have taken over. They still bear the scars of Soviet communism, but what you see here is all the empires have essentially been destroyed and democracies have taken their place and are really thriving. America becomes the sole leader in the world. And so then what I want to do is focus a little bit on the founding ideas of America, especially America. You could say the Western democracies as a whole, but it starts in 1776. So the recognition there is that in the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence is that the government exists to protect rights, doesn't grant them. That is the big groundbreaking Enlightenment idea. And you can say it traces itself back to the Magna Carta, but it really takes hold with abolishing monarchy in 1776. And this idea that our rights are inherent, given by God, not that rulers have a right to rule that's given by God, the divine right. We're completely casting that idea aside and acknowledging that our human rights are given by God, and the government's only job is to protect those rights. The documents like the Bill of Rights reflect that. Completely radical idea here, okay? And so this experiment we have in democracy, the main problem is mission creep, okay? The governments expand their powers during wars and pandemics and economic collapse. So the idea is that in 1776, all the way to about 1800, that's the freest Americans ever were. The government didn't have time to start encroaching on our rights. They didn't have any wars to start justifying taking our rights away, the pandemics, none of that. It's all the way up until, that era lasts until the Civil War, when Lincoln famously suspends habeas corpus and the federal government takes a much bigger role in the lives of Americans and our rights start disappearing. So each generation, what happens, inherits a larger and more powerful state. The people that lived in the early 1800s knew a very small, very weak federal government. Late 1800s, a much bigger federal government, all the way until you get into the early to mid 1900s, the World War I/II era, where the government starts taking a really big role after Roosevelt's administration, the New Deal, etc. And then government has just grown and grown and grown with each economic collapse and war. I mean, essentially every generation, the government's gotten bigger. Government hasn't gotten smaller in living memory. So what happens, this pattern of power, right? The governments don't give back their power voluntarily. Over time, the bureaucracy just grows and grows and grows. The waste and efficiencies increase, controls expand, and what started as democratic authority, authority that is given by the people to protect us, protect our rights, starts shifting to be more authoritarian. Then you start getting the same critiques that we had of the monarchies in the late 1700s, where they start using these bloated bureaucracies to suppress the rights, the free speech rights, the religious rights of people. You start seeing the same thing done by the democracies. You can look back at the COVID pandemic, where they were stopping people from going to church, despite having no constitutional authority to do that. So this same idea that we're being cracked down on by our rulers, the issue people had with kings, the issue that I have with our republic right now. The difference is the technology. The state now has a much easier time cracking down on us, being able to surveil us, having much better policing techniques and equipment. It's a much more authoritarian state than any king could have ever wanted. I say the Roman emperors, if they could look down and see, a U.S. president right now, they would blush at the amount of power he had. They couldn't imagine the control an American president, even constrained by the Bill of Rights, has over his citizens versus what a Roman emperor, the control he could exercise over his citizens. Not even close. Despite him having the full authority of a dictator, could never have exercised the power over his subjects that the U.S. government exercises over us right now. No way, not even close. So the biggest concern here, leaders in a republic act with short-term incentives, okay, elections. It's hard to get a president to look past 4 years because there's no guarantee he's going to be there anymore. Same with the House of Representatives. 2 years is all they get, and so they're just doing short-term thinking, where at least with these monarchies, they were planning on at least having their family in power for generations, so they could think much longer term, which is a really big advantage. And right now, I think what we're seeing is, it's often called late stage capitalism. It's where people are referring to the monopolies and firms with all sorts of market power. But really what I think we're seeing is late stage democracy. And that's why we're seeing rising populism with Americans all across the political spectrum. The left and right has its flavors of populism. There's a lot of distrust in institutions, the highest distrust actually we've ever measured. There's a perception that laws aren't applied equally, that our founding principles are being ignored. This is all just looking like straight back into the American Revolution and the French Revolution. It is really interesting there, especially when you take into account in the American Revolution. People will say, the American Revolution was because there was no representation, no taxation without representation. That was the term. Most people don't know the colonists did not want a seat in Parliament. That wasn't the point. They didn't want to send somebody to England before they got taxed. And by the way, the tea tax and the Stamp Act, both of those, they were less than a 5% tax, and we fought an entire war over it. But we tolerate being taxed at 50% here. So that's just a little tidbit for you guys. But the no taxation without representation, what that meant was any taxes imposed by England and Parliament there were by definition illegitimate. The colonists, what they want to do was set up their own legislatures here and then decide what taxes would be in those legislatures. They weren't asking for seats in Parliament. They never did. And actually, the beef with the American colonists, what the American colonists were really so upset about, they were upset at these taxes that were imposed actually by Parliament, not by King George. They were petitioning King George to stop these taxes and call out Parliament for the illegal implementation of taxes. But their beef was actually with Parliament. And they don't like to teach that in schools a whole lot, because the whole idea of the American Revolution is we were standing up to this brutal dictator, when actually we were standing up to an out of control legislature who we didn't deem legitimate to have the authority to tax us. But that's not as cool of a story as standing up to a king. Because if we start teaching kids that, some legislatures are illegitimate if they're not following the will of the people, kids might start asking questions about our own legislature. So they don't really like to talk about that. Just a quick little aside. Let's take a quick break and then we will come back. Okay, so where does that leave us? I think we're coming full circle again. People are really frustrated. Populism's taking hold of our country, just like it did back in the 1700s. Our economic situation is really bad. There are going to be corrections coming. We're 40 trillion in debt, so austerity is going to be coming. Austerity will be coming. There'll be some restructuring of our debt. There's going to have to be, which is probably going to collapse the dollar as the world reserve currency. We've just ridden that one out for too long. 40 trillion is too much. I think that the collapse of our democratic systems already here. I mean, we completely broke down over COVID. You had people mandating masks that didn't work. You had governors like Gavin Newsom stopping people from going to the gym, people being arrested for paddleboarding, going to church. That is the complete breakdown of our human rights. It's the complete breakdown of the Bill of Rights, all the ideals that it stood for. We have given it all up to authoritarian rule, to the nanny state. So what's going to be the likely reality? And that's a difficult transition period as we start to come to grips with our financial situation, as we come to grips with our culture has completely changed. Again, we're no longer a society that's ready to start a war over a 5% tax. We're a society that has completely embraced one of the world's biggest bureaucracies and is ready to accept a government that, is damn near as intrusive as the Soviet Union and Mao's government. I think if Stalin could look up at us, because he's obviously burning in the pits of hell, but if he could see the amount of surveillance our government has access to, what our NSA does, if he could see the just type of control our government is able to enforce upon us at a whim, it would make him blush. He would love to live in a day and age and in a society that embraces surveillance the way Americans do. It is tragic. It really is. We've really given up our republic. And, social media, I see the parallels there too. It's like the modern printing press. Information spreads faster than the government can control. And so therefore the government cracks down on it. Again, just like during COVID with people being banned off YouTube and Facebook for telling the truth, malinformation, the Biden administration shutting people down. That's what, has fueled this global populism. And we may find that this populist wave rivals the Enlightenment in impact. And so in closing, the government not protecting our individual rights, it's eroding them, actually. And freedom it's not going to be defined by the Bill of Rights anymore. It's going to be defined on where we as citizens draw the line, because we've already let them completely encroach on the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Ninth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment's already been almost completely destroyed. You can listen to, accounts of all sorts of celebrities and politicians. Take Tucker Carlson into account and the spying that's been done on him. It's gone. We have allowed it. Benjamin Franklin, I believe it says, it's a republic if you can keep it. And it seems like we've lost it. We have allowed the government to grow to such a level that authoritarians wouldn't even consider us a democracy anymore. If they could look across the pond and say, and I would bet people like, Putin and Xi, the president of China, talk about this with each other. I would be laughing at us, say, those people think they're free over there. They think they have a democracy. No, nothing that there's a Princeton study, and I'm going to find it and post it for us, that there is no correlation between a popular policy among the public and it getting passed in our government. No correlation. And you can look at that with the Save America Act. Something like 80% of people want voter ID, and we can't get it passed but in a democracy, 80% support should be able to get us a law passed. But nope, because we don't really live in a true democracy anymore. It's pretty tragic, actually. And I think the whole cycle starting over again, all those crumbling empires that we look back and laugh at, that's happening to our democracies. And you can look into Europe right now, and we'll do another episode of that soon. I mean, the United Kingdom, 12,000 people in jail over Facebook posts. Germany, you can go to jail for your Facebook posts. France is completely out of control. We're losing our democracies in the West. And what we instead have are these Eastern-style nanny states. And pretty soon, that's all there's going to be left in the world. The East isn't going to be the new bastion of democracy. You look at Russia and China, they're not like good governments protecting individual rights. They have no history of protecting individual rights, so it's not going to come from there. Same with the Middle East and Africa. There's South America, same thing. No real history of democracy. So the only place, if we're going to save individual liberty, is going to be in Europe and North America. So we got to hold on to it. We got to do what we can to fight back and cut the government back down to size. Otherwise, it's a nanny state, and our republic will be completely gone. I don't like to be pessimistic and say it's already gone. I want to say we can turn it around now, and with some pretty brutal austerity and a libertarian legislature and president, we could probably do it. But man, we are sure not trending that way. So on that happy note, we're out.